I have watched a great many people try to build a fire, and I will tell you something that may surprise you. Most of them get it wrong, and they get it wrong in the very same way, and it is a way so common that people think their struggle with fire is normal. That a fire is simply a fussy and difficult thing that must be coaxed and fed and fought with and often gives up and dies on you anyway. They crumple some paper, pile the wood on top of it in a heap, set a match to the paper, and then watch as the paper burns away in a bright, useless flash, and the wood, barely warmed, sits there and smokes and sulks and finally goes out, and they curse and start again. I was raised heating my home and cooking my food with fire, as my people still do, and I am here to tell you that a fire is not fussy at all once you understand it, and that nearly all the trouble people have comes from one simple thing they get backward. Today, I am going to teach you how to build a fire that lights on the first match and burns strong and clean and long the way we build them, and I promise you that once you know the secret, you will never struggle with a fire again. Let me be honest and plain with you first, as always, for the secret is not really a secret at all, but a plain understanding of what a fire needs, and once you have that understanding, everything else follows, and no trick is needed. A fire needs three things, and only three things to live. It needs fuel, which is the wood. It needs heat, which the match provides to begin, and which the fire then makes for itself. And it needs air. And this last one, the air, is the thing that nearly everyone forgets, and the forgetting of it is the root of almost all fire trouble. A fire breathes. It is very nearly a living thing in this respect. It draws in air, and it uses the air to burn. And if you choke off its air by piling the wood too tight and heavy, the fire smothers and dies no matter how much fuel and heat you give it. Fuel, heat, and air, all three together, and the air most of all is the one people starve their fires of. Hold those three things in your mind, and let us build a fire the right way. Now the first thing, before ever you strike a match, is the wood itself. For you cannot build a good fire out of poor wood, and here is where a great many fires are lost before they are ever begun. Your wood must be dry. I cannot say this strongly enough. Wet wood, green wood, wood that was cut from a living tree too recently and has not been let to dry will not burn well, and often will not burn at all. It hisses and smokes and steams because the fire's heat is being spent boiling the water out of the wood instead of burning the wood, and a fire cannot win that fight. Good firewood is wood that was cut and split and then stacked up off the ground under cover and left to dry for a good long while, the better part of a year or more, until the water has left it and it is light in the hand and the ends have cracked and it makes a sharp ringing knock when two pieces are struck together, not a dull wet thud. That is called seasoned wood, and only seasoned dry wood makes a good fire. If your wood is wet or green, no skill in the building will save you. So begin with dry, seasoned, well-stored wood, and you have won half the battle before you strike the match. And you must have your wood in three sizes, and this is the heart of the whole method, so attend closely. A fire cannot leap straight from a match to a great log, for the match's little flame has nowhere near the heat to set a big piece of wood alight. The fire must climb up to the big wood by stages, each stage lighting the next, like a ladder. So you need first your tinder, which is the fine, dry, fluffy stuff that catches from the very touch of a flame, such as dry grass, fine wood shavings, birch bark, crumpled paper, the fluff of certain plants, a bit of dry pine needle. This catches from the match. Second, you need your kindling, which is small dry sticks and split wood, from the thickness of a matchstick up to the thickness of your thumb or a bit more. The burning tinder lights the small kindling, and the small kindling lights the larger kindling, climbing up in size. And third, you need your fuel wood, the proper logs and large splits that will burn long and give the real and lasting heat, and these are lit by the well-established kindling. Tinder, kindling, fuel in three ascending sizes is the ladder the fire climbs from a single match to a roaring blaze. Have all three ready and to hand before you begin, sorted and within reach, for once the fire is going, you will not have time to go hunting for the next size. Now, here is the secret itself, the one thing most people get exactly backward, and once I tell it to you, you will wonder why you were never told before. Most people build their fire from the top down in their thinking, but the bottom up in their doing, putting the tinder and paper at the bottom, the kindling in the middle, and the big wood piled on top. And it seems sensible, for the flame rises, so surely you light it at the bottom, and it climbs up through the wood. But it does not work well, and here is why. When you light the tinder at the bottom, Its flame does rise, but it rises into a heavy pile of wood packed above it, which smothers the air and drops cold, heavy fuel down onto the little new flame and chokes it, and as often as not the whole thing collapses in on itself and goes out. The better way, the way we build a fire that lights clean and burns for hours, is very nearly the opposite. You build it from the bottom up in order of size, largest at the bottom. You lay your biggest logs down first, side by side on the floor of the hearth or the stove, making a solid base. On top of those, you lay a layer of your medium fuel wood, crosswise. On top of that, your kindling, the small sticks, crosswise again, and then your finest kindling above that. And at the very top, on the top of the whole pile, you place your tinder, and you light it there at the top. It seems backward, and it is backward from what most folks do, and that is exactly why it works when theirs fails. Let me tell you why this upside-down fire, this top-down fire, works so much better, for once you understand it, you will never doubt it. When you light the tinder at the top, its flame has all the open air in the world above it, nothing pressing down to smother it, so it burns bright and strong and free. That burning tinder lights the fine kindling just beneath it, which lights the larger kindling beneath that, and the fire works its way slowly and steadily downward through the pile, each layer catching the one below as it burns down onto it. And because the fire burns downward through progressively larger wood, by the time it reaches the big logs at the bottom, it is no longer a little match flame, but a strong, hot, well-established fire with plenty of heat to catch even a large log, and it settles down onto that base of big wood and burns there, long and steady and hot, for hours. It never smothers, because nothing is ever piled on top of the flame to choke it. It never collapses, because it is built solid from the bottom up, and it burns clean with little smoke because everything is getting the air it needs. A fire built this way will light on one match and then need no tending for a long while, burning down through itself like a candle, and it is how we lay a fire in the stove of an evening and have good coals still in the morning. Try it once, and you will not go back to the smoky, struggling heap. Now, if you are building a smaller fire, a campfire, or a quick cooking fire rather than a great hearth fire, there are two other good shapes worth knowing, and both respect the same law of air and the same ladder of sizes. The first is the teepee, where you set your tinder in the middle and lean your kindling up around it like the poles of a teepee, all meeting at the top, and then lean your larger wood around that, leaving gaps for the air to flow up through. You light the tinder in the center, and the flame climbs up the leaning sticks. The teepee gives a hot, bright, fast fire, good for boiling a pot quickly, though it burns fast and wants feeding. The second is the log cabin, where you lay two pieces of wood parallel, then two more across their ends the other way, and so on, building up a little square open tower like the walls of a log cabin, with the tinder and kindling inside it, and you light the middle. The log cabin is sturdy and gets good air through its open walls and burns steady, but whichever shape you build, the law never changes. Dry wood, the three sizes in their ladder, and above all, always, room for the air to move. Never pack the wood so tight that the fire cannot breathe. Leave the gaps. The gaps are where the fire lives. Now I must speak to you with all seriousness about safety, for fire is a good servant and a terrible master, and I would not teach you to make a fire without teaching you as well how to keep it from harming you and yours. Attend to this part as closely as to any, for the whole of the rest is worthless if you burn your house or yourself. First, before you light any fire indoors, in a fireplace or a stove, make certain the chimney or the flue is open and clear, so the smoke has its way out, for a fire lit with the flue closed will fill your home with smoke, and worse, with a poison in the smoke that you cannot see or smell, and that can kill a person in his sleep. That unseen poison, made by any fire that burns without enough air or without a clear way for its fumes to escape, is a real and deadly danger, and it is why a fire must always have good air and a clear vent to the outside, and why it is wise to have a device in the home that watches for that poison and sounds an alarm. Never let a fire smolder shut up in a poorly vented room. Second, keep the area all around the fire clear, well back, of anything that can burn, rugs and curtains and papers and furniture and clothing, for a stray spark or a rolling ember can set them alight in a moment. Third, have your means of putting the fire out close at hand before you ever light it, a bucket of water, a bucket of sand, or a proper extinguisher, so that if the fire ever goes where it should not, you can stop it at once and not go running for water while the flames spread. Fourth, and hear me well, never, ever leave a fire burning unattended. Not for a moment when it is young, and never overnight in an open hearth. A fire left alone is a fire that can escape, and countless homes and lives have been lost to a fire that was left just for a minute, just while someone stepped away. And fifth, keep the children and the animals well back from it always, and never let a small child near a fire unwatched, not even for an instant, for a child does not understand the danger until it is too late. Respect the fire. It has no malice, but it has no mercy either, and it must always be watched and never trusted to behave. Let me give you a word on the tinder. That first fine stuff that catches from the match, for good tinder is worth its weight in gold to a fire builder, and a wise person lays it up in advance, rather than scrambling for it in the cold. The best tinder is anything very fine and very dry that will take a flame from the least touch. Fine dry wood shavings curled up thin with a knife. The papery outer bark of the birch tree, which is one of the finest tinders in all the world, and will even light when a little damp, for it holds an oil in it that burns eagerly. Dry grasses and the fluffy seed heads of certain plants. Crumpled paper in a pinch, though it burns away fast. And best of all, if you can find it, the wood we call fat wood, which is the resin-soaked heart of an old pine stump, so full of the pine's own flammable pitch that a thin sliver of it will burn like a little torch and light even wet kindling around it. A wise fire builder keeps a box of good dry tinder always ready by the hearth, gathered and dried in the fine weather against the day it is needed, so that he is never caught trying to find dry tinder in the rain or the snow. Prepare your tinder ahead, keep it dry, and you will never fail to get a fire going, and keep your matches dry as well, in a tight tin, for the finest tinder in the world will not help you if your matches have gone damp and will not strike. A little forethought in the fine weather, a dry box of tinder and a dry tin of matches set by, is what separates the person who can always make a fire from the person who can only sometimes. And let me teach you the old skill of keeping a fire through the night, which we call banking, for it is a great labor to build a fire fresh every morning, and our grandparents knew how to keep the fire alive from one day to the next, so that it need only be roused, not rebuilt. When the fire has burned down of an evening to a good bed of glowing coals, you rake those hot coals together into a mound, and then you cover them over with a layer of ash, the cold ash from the edges of the hearth, banking it up over and around the coals like a blanket. That blanket of ash cuts down the air, reaching the coals to a mere trickle, so that they cannot blaze up and burn themselves out, but neither do they die, for a little air still reaches them, and so they smolder there slow and low all through the night, holding their heat and their fire deep within. In the morning you rake the ash away, and there in the heart of the mound you find the coals still red and living, and you lay a little fresh tinder and kindling on them, and blow gently, and up leaps the flame again, the same fire that warmed you yesterday, never having truly gone out. A well-banked fire will hold its coals 8 or 10 hours and more. It is a beautiful old skill, and there is a deep satisfaction in keeping a single fire alive day after day, and it saves a great deal of matches and labor besides. I remember teaching all of this to a young man from the town who came to help us one winter, and had never in his life built a proper fire, only ever turned on a furnace with a switch. The first fires he tried to build, before I showed him the way, were a sorry sight. Great smoking heaps piled up tight and lit at the bottom, going out again and again while he grew red in the face with frustration, certain that fire was simply a cantankerous and impossible thing. Then I showed him the 3 sizes, and the dry wood, and above all the building from the top down, with room for the air, and I watched the understanding come into his face as his very first top-down fire caught on the single match and burned down clean and steady and strong without his having to touch it again. He stood there and watched it burn and shook his head and said he could hardly believe it had been so simple all along, that no one had ever just told him how a fire actually works, and that is the truth of it, and that is, it is simple. Once you understand the air and the sizes and the building from the top, it was never cantankerous. It was only that no one had ever explained it. So now I have explained it to you, and you need never struggle with a fire again. Let me gather the whole of it together for you now. A fire needs 3 things, fuel and heat and air, and the air is the one most people forget. Begin with dry, well-seasoned wood, never wet or green, for no skill will make a good fire of poor wood. Have your wood in 3 sizes: the fine tinder that catches from a match, the kindling of small sticks, and the fuel wood of proper logs, and keep all 3 sorted and to hand before you begin. Then build your fire from the bottom up in order of size, the big logs at the bottom, then kindling, then tinder at the very top, and light it at the top so it burns downward, clean and strong and long, never smothering and never collapsing. For a smaller fire, use the teepee for a quick hot blaze, or the log cabin for a steady one, but always leave the gaps for the air to breathe. And above all, honor every rule of safety: an open flue, a clear space, water at hand, never unattended, and children kept well back, for fire deserves and demands your care and respect. Do these things, and you will light a fire on the first match every time, and it will serve you well and safely, and you will have mastered one of the oldest and most useful skills a human being can possess, a skill our ancestors knew and that made all the rest of civilization possible. For there is something ancient and deep in the building of a good fire, something that reaches back past the Amish, past the pioneers, past all of written history, to the very first people who ever coaxed a flame to life and gathered around it in the cold and the dark. To know how to make fire is to hold a piece of that ancient inheritance in your own 2 hands, an inheritance most people today have entirely lost, able only to turn a knob and never to truly make a fire from nothing but wood and a spark and understanding. It is a good thing to know. It connects a person to something very old and very real. And on the day when the knob does not work, when the power is out and the cold is coming on, the one who knows how to build a fire is a very useful person to be. So learn it and practice it and teach it to your children and keep that old flame and all it means alive. If this is the kind of good old useful wisdom you have been hungry for, the kind that makes you a little more capable and a little more self-reliant and connects you back to the good sense of those who came before us, then stay here with me. There is a great deal more where this came from, and I aim to bring it back to you, one piece at a time. Subscribe, and we will keep remembering the old ways together, because some of the most precious things we ever knew are the simple ones we let ourselves forget, and the making of good warm fire from wood and spark and understanding is surely one of them.